She said, "Your culture's old-fashioned, we're modern," after mocking my family traditions. I said, "Modernize alone." The celebration, I invited her replacement to broke more than just her pride. I, 32M, thought I'd found my forever person. I was wrong. The moment she laughed at my grandmother's prayer ritual during our engagement ceremony, I should have known. But love makes you blind to red flags, and I was practically stumbling through a crimson forest. We'd been together for 3 years. She was everything I thought I wanted: educated, ambitious, beautiful. She worked in tech, spoke 3 languages, and could hold conversations about quantum physics over dinner. My family adored her initially, especially my traditional Indian parents who saw her as the perfect modern daughter-in-law. The cracks started showing during our engagement planning. My mother suggested we include a small puja ceremony before the ring exchange. Nothing elaborate, just a 15-minute blessing with immediate family. She rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might detach from her optic nerves. She told me later that evening that these rituals were archaic, that we were educated people living in the 21st century, not some backward village. She said my family's attachment to tradition was holding us back from being truly modern. The way she said modern made it sound like a badge of honor she was desperate to pin on herself. I tried explaining that these weren't just rituals to my family. They were connections to our heritage, ways of honoring the people who came before us. She nodded, but I could see her mentally drafting an email while I spoke. The engagement ceremony became a battlefield. She arrived 40 minutes late, claiming work emergency. When my aunt began the traditional prayers, she stood there checking her phone. When my grandmother offered her prasad, she politely declined, whispering loud enough for others to hear that she didn't believe in feeding sugar to solve life's problems. My cousin later told me she'd heard her complaining to her friends about having to perform for my backwards family just to keep me happy. That night, I confronted her about it. She didn't deny it. Instead, she launched into a lecture about how my culture's old-fashioned mindset was preventing us from being the modern couple we could be. She said she loved me but couldn't pretend to respect traditions that had no place in contemporary society. She suggested we have a simple court marriage instead of the traditional ceremony my parents had dreamed of hosting. That's when something crystallized for me. This wasn't about tradition versus modernity. This was about respect. She could choose not to participate, but the mockery, the dismissive attitude toward people who'd raised me with love and care, that was unforgivable. I told her that if she found my culture so incompatible with her modern sensibilities, perhaps she should modernize alone. She stared at me like I'd spoken in an ancient dialect she refused to learn. She left that night, taking her engagement ring and her certainty that I'd come crawling back within a week. Update 1. I didn't crawl back. Instead, I did something that would have made my strategic planning grandmother proud. 3 months passed. She tried calling twice, sent a few texts that oscillated between apologetic and accusatory. I didn't respond. My friends thought I was being stubborn. My family, surprisingly, supported my decision completely. My mother said she'd rather see me alone than with someone who disrespected the values that shaped me. During this time, I reconnected with someone I'd almost forgotten about. She worked at the cultural center where my family volunteered during festival seasons. We'd known each other peripherally for years, but I'd never really noticed her while I was with my ex. She was different, not just in the obvious ways. She wore traditional clothes sometimes, spoke fluent Hindi with my grandmother, actually enjoyed the stories my uncle told about our family history. But more importantly, she was curious about traditions rather than dismissive. She asked questions instead of making judgments. We started spending time together. Coffee conversations turned into long walks. She accompanied me to my cousin's wedding, where she participated enthusiastically in the ceremonies. Watching her laugh with my aunts while learning to tie a sari properly, I realized I'd never seen my ex integrate with my family the way this woman did effortlessly. 6 months after my engagement ended, I asked her to be my girlfriend. She said yes while we were sitting in my grandmother's garden, surrounded by the marigolds my grandmother planted every year for Diwali. 2 months later, my grandmother's health started declining rapidly. The doctors said it was her heart, but I think she was just ready to rest. She'd lived through partition, raised 6 children, and watched her family grow across 3 countries. She was tired but content. My grandmother had one wish before she passed. She wanted to see me married. Not just committed or engaged, but properly married with all the ceremonies she dreamed of for her eldest grandson. The woman I was dating understood immediately when I explained the situation. She said she'd be honored to marry me, not just for my grandmother's sake, but because she genuinely loved me and could see us building a life together. We planned the wedding in 3 weeks. Nothing elaborate, just immediate family and close friends. But it would include all the traditional ceremonies my grandmother wanted to witness. Update 2. This is where my story becomes a lesson about the universe's sense of justice. My ex found out about the wedding through mutual friends. She showed up at my office 2 days before the ceremony, looking like she'd been rehearsing this moment in mirrors for weeks. She told me she'd been thinking about us, that she realized she'd been too hasty in her judgment of my family's traditions. She said she was willing to compromise, to participate in whatever ceremonies I needed. She said she missed me and wanted to work things out. I listened to her entire speech without interrupting. When she finished, I thanked her for coming and told her it was too late. I was marrying someone else in 2 days. The expression on her face shifted through several phases: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally, desperate calculation. She asked if she could attend the wedding, claiming she wanted to wish me well and show there were no hard feelings. I should have said no immediately. Instead, I made a decision that my grandmother would have called giving her enough rope to hang herself with. I told her she could come to the reception. Just the reception, not the ceremony itself. I told my fiancé about the conversation, and she agreed with surprising grace. She said she wasn't threatened by someone who'd already shown her true character. Update 3. The wedding ceremony was perfect. My grandmother sat in the front row, wrapped in the sari she'd worn to her own wedding 60 years earlier. She cried when the priest pronounced us married, and my new wife touched her feet for blessings. My grandmother whispered something to her that made them both laugh through their tears. My ex arrived at the reception dressed like she was attending a funeral: black dress, minimal jewelry, an expression that could curdle milk. She brought a gift that I later discovered was a book about modern relationships in traditional societies, with several passages highlighted in yellow. She spent the evening making small talk with other guests, but I could see her watching everything with the fascination of an anthropologist studying primitive customs. When the traditional dancing began, she stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed, looking like she was documenting evidence of cultural backwardness. The moment that broke everything happened during the blessing ceremony. My wife and I were sitting together while the elders offered prayers and advice for our marriage. My aunt was explaining the significance of the 7 circles we'd walked around the sacred fire, how each circle represented a promise we made to each other. My ex, who'd apparently been drinking more than socializing, made a comment loud enough for several people to hear. She said something about how these rituals were just performance theater for people too afraid to embrace real intimacy, how modern couples shouldn't need ancient superstitions to validate their connection. The room went quiet. Not the good kind of quiet that comes before applause, but the uncomfortable silence that precedes social disasters. My uncle, who's usually the most diplomatic person in any room, looked directly at her and asked if she had a problem with the way we chose to celebrate our marriage. She must have mistaken his calm tone for an invitation to elaborate, because she launched into the same lecture she'd given me months earlier about tradition versus progress. She said that educated people like herself had moved beyond the need for ritualistic validation of relationships. She said she felt sorry for couples who couldn't trust their connection without religious ceremonies. She said she represented the kind of thinking that would eventually make these gatherings obsolete. That's when my new mother-in-law stood up. Final update. My wife's mother is a retired college professor who spent 30 years teaching comparative religion. She's the kind of woman who can discuss Nietzsche over breakfast and Rumi over dinner, equally comfortable with both. She's also someone who doesn't tolerate disrespect disguised as intellectual superiority. She approached my ex with the measured pace of someone who's about to deliver a masterclass in dignity. She told her she found it interesting that someone who claimed to value modern thinking would attend a celebration specifically to criticize the hosts and their choices. She asked if this behavior represented the kind of progress my ex was advocating for. My ex tried to backtrack, claiming she was just engaging in intellectual discourse. My mother-in-law smiled and said that intellectual discourse required respect for different perspectives, not dismissive judgment of practices she clearly didn't understand. Then she did something that will remain legendary in our family forever. She invited my ex to explain what aspects of modernity she felt were incompatible with respect for family traditions. She gave her a platform to defend her position publicly. My ex took the bait completely. She spent 10 minutes explaining how tradition held people back from authentic self-expression, how religious rituals were crutches for people afraid of making independent moral decisions, how truly modern relationships didn't require external validation. When she finished, my mother-in-law thanked her for clarifying her position. Then she asked one simple question. If my ex truly believed in the importance of independent thinking and authentic self-expression, why had she come to a traditional wedding specifically to tell everyone their choices were wrong? The question hung in the air like incense. My ex realized she'd been trapped in her own logic, but by then, everyone had understood exactly who she was and what she represented. My grandmother, who'd been listening to this entire exchange, asked to speak to my ex privately. I watched them talk for about 5 minutes in the corner of the room. I never found out what my grandmother said, but when my ex returned, she looked like she'd been spiritually audited by someone who'd seen enough of life to recognize genuine character. She left immediately after that conversation. She didn't say goodbye to me or my wife. She just collected her purse and walked out of the reception like she was fleeing a crime scene. 6 months later, my ex tried to reconnect with mutual friends, but the story of her behavior at my wedding had made its rounds. People weren't openly hostile, but they weren't particularly welcoming either. She'd revealed something about her character that couldn't be unexplained or forgiven easily. She eventually moved to a different city for work. I heard through friends that she struggled to maintain relationships because she had a pattern of criticizing people's choices while claiming intellectual superiority. My grandmother passed away peacefully 4 months after my wedding. Her last words to me were about how proud she was that I'd married someone who understood that respecting tradition and embracing progress weren't mutually exclusive. My wife and I have built something beautiful together. We blend traditions with contemporary values naturally. We participate in family ceremonies because they connect us to our heritage, and we make our own traditions because we're creating our own story. Sometimes people ask me if I regret inviting my ex to the reception, if I think it was cruel to let her expose herself that way. I don't think it was cruel. I think it was necessary. She needed to understand that dismissing people's values isn't intellectual superiority. It's emotional immaturity dressed up in academic language. The woman I married shows me every day what real modernity looks like. It's having the confidence to respect different perspectives while staying true to your own values. It's understanding that wisdom doesn't have an expiration date just because it comes from previous generations. My ex learned that being modern isn't about rejecting everything that came before you. It's about having the maturity to integrate the best of all worlds into something meaningful and authentic. She said my culture was old-fashioned and that we should be modern. I told her to modernize alone. The celebration where she revealed her true character broke more than just her pride. It broke the illusion she'd maintained about being intellectually superior to everyone around her. Sometimes the best revenge isn't planned at all. Sometimes it's just giving someone enough space to show everyone exactly who they really are. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us. Please subscribe.